Welcome to another edition of Responder Resilience. I'm David Dashinger, and we are going to be talking about overcoming the stigma of getting help as a first responder. So we will have our two amazing expert guests, Dr. Stacy Raymond and Bonnie Rumilly, LCSW. They'll be joining us in a minute. When I was trained to become a firefighter and an EMT, very little time was devoted to educating us about job-related stress, burnout, trauma, sleep disruptions, and mental health. We didn't know that there were life-saving resources, resilience strategies, and support groups that help first responders to cope with anxiety, depression, and stress. It's a huge understatement to say that first responder mental health is in crisis. Fire, police, and EMS are professions where more die by their own hands than by the hazards of the job. And research shows that up to a quarter of public safety dispatchers have symptoms of PTSD and depression. In this silent worldwide crisis, first responders are quietly suffering due to stigmas around mental health services and lack of awareness about vital resources that are available to assist them. We can help the helpers. Welcome to Responder Resilience, a panel of experts sharing their wisdom and experience from the front lines of first responder health and wellness. I'm David Dashinger, retired fire lieutenant and EMT with over 20 years as a leader in emergency services. Dr. Stacy Raymond is a clinical psychologist and is an approved EMDR and trauma specialist. Half of her practice is dedicated to first responders and military veterans. Stacy created Responder Wellness, Inc., a nonprofit charity for EMS, police, and fire. Stacy co-leads a weekly peer support meeting for first responders along with Bonnie Rumilly. Bonnie is a licensed clinical social worker specializing in the treatment of adults, adolescents, children, and first responders. Bonnie worked in Newtown treating trauma directly after the Sandy Hook school shootings and is an EMDR therapist. A board member of the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team, Bonnie's also a 21-year emergency medical technician. And I'd like to welcome Dr. Stacy Raymond and Bonnie Rumilly, LCSW, to this episode of Responder Resilience. Great to see you.
Hi, David. Thanks for having us. Hi, David.
We, in the intro, we alluded to the fact that there's a stigma around seeking help, particularly help with mental health issues and other issues like substance abuse and problems that brothers and sisters encounter during their lives as first responders. So talk a little bit about what's behind that stigma. Why is it so difficult for first responders to ask for help?
I think there are many reasons for that, but I think that one of them is it's sort of the unspoken thing with first responders. Something brought you into this work. Someone made you want to be a police officer, a firefighter, an EMT, a dispatcher. And I think that what people bring to that is often that drive to help others. And sometimes that's an attempt to help the self, to right a wrong of childhood or the past. And through helping the world and saving everyone else, maybe I'll save me too.
And I think to expound on that, if you look at first responders, there are heroes. They are the rescuers. They're in that role of being there for other people. And so I think that there is this reluctance for them to ever, look at themselves as people that would eventually could possibly need help because of what they're exposed to in their line of work. I mean, much of what they deal with is the worst day or the worst nightmare for the general public. And they deal with that day in and day out. And very rarely do they ever look at themselves as, well, gee, maybe this is having some wear and tear effect on me. Maybe I should do something about it.
Right. And even some responders I've worked with are coming from a military background, and so they're bringing into the job some of that trauma and experience that they had in the armed forces, which kind of can elevate some of the symptoms of mental health issues even more.
I think there's a lot of minimization in first responders because what is abnormal becomes your norm. Mm-hmm. And so therefore I think that first responders feel, well, this is my job. I'm supposed to deal with this. It's supposed to be okay. And so when they are struggling or there one day arises a problem, they look inside about what's wrong with me rather than looking outside and being able to just have that lens of, why do I feel this way? What is it that led to this? And I think it touches on the lack of education for first responders. It's only in recent years, look at this podcast. We're only now just talking about this. And the fire department has been in existence for how many hundreds of years? Police, EMS is relatively new in the late 60s. But when you really think that we're only just educating people now on their feelings and how to build coping skills for dealing with these situations, we're way behind the 8 ball. Now, a lot of people came in the eras where there was zero understanding about mental health and zero support or education available.
And the mentality being, all right, so you had a bad call, suck it up, because the tones might drop and you have, there might be another call. You need to be ready. And so there's like not even the possibility of processing what happened from the previous call or any acknowledgement sometimes that call may have affected you. Maybe it involved a child. Maybe you have a child the same age at home. And so this call has rocked your world in some way. And now you have to just tuck that away and then go to the next call. And, that we see that with first responders. There's this, they have to compartmentalize. Some of that is necessary. You show up, it's, you're there to fix the problem. You need to put your feelings aside, any associations that you might have to the victim. And you need to just be on, and you need to do your job, whether you're a police officer, firefighter, EMT, paramedic. You just need to perform. But then when you've tucked away your own personal response to this event, there tends to be no follow through or follow up on that. And that's not the first responders' fault. That's kind of the culture that you're in, that compartmentalize and just lock it away. But then that builds up, and we all have a breaking point. So that's one reason why we want to bring this to light. That the helpers need help too sometimes. And why do we know that? Look at the suicide rate among first responders. Look at the rate of alcoholism. Look at the divorce rate. Also physical illness, developing some sort of physical ailment in response to all of that stress that you're exposed to day in and day out. Difficulty sleeping, right? I mean, show me a first responder that, gets the alleged, 8 hours or the recommended 8 hours of sleep a night. It doesn't usually happen, especially, because of shift work.
I think there are a lot of external pressures that are placed on first responders, whether it be long shifts. Some people work 48 hours in a row consecutively. Mm-hmm. How is that even possible in your brain to do that? Working 3 jobs, 100 hours a week. Mm-hmm. So there's all the external pressure, the difficulty of the calls, the acuity that is necessary in these situations. There's no margin for error. In most of these fields, there's no margin for error. So I think that first responders also put a pressure on themselves that they can't mess up. They can't make a mistake because they know the stakes are high, and they know that if they do make a mistake, a life could be lost. And I think that pressure is so real, and first responders put it on themselves too. And that's why when something does happen, because life happens and mistakes happen no matter where people are. When it happens, it's even more difficult for them to manage and handle and seek help for, because there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame associated with, I didn't do what I'm programmed to do. And what Stacy and I do in the office with first responders, it's saying, are you a machine? Mm-hmm. Are you supposed to be a computer? No, you're a living, breathing, walking human who comes to this work with your own lives and your own plethora of feelings and issues outside of the job.
Right. And a couple of things come to mind. One is, I heard this phrase when I was becoming promoted to an officer position, and it really stuck in my mind. And it was, we have one chance to get it right. It's so different than so many other jobs, but this is literally, you are showing up in the moment, and, the as you say, the stakes are high, the margin for error is extremely low, and we can just beat ourselves up relentlessly if we make even a couple of small mistakes that, maybe didn't kill somebody or cause a disastrous outcome. But we become so demanding of ourselves during the job that sometimes I found for myself just to let go of that was very difficult, to kind of like just say, you're human. Overall, you did the best you could do, but we can't control everything. We can't be perfect. And that makes it that much harder to, do the job that we love to do it as professionals.
Mm-hmm. And I think you're touching on the other piece of it. And this is me being an EMT talking here too, but you do this work because you love it and it comes from your heart. Mm-hmm. And when you do something out of your heart, it's that much more painful when things don't go the way you want them to. Because it's not, I'm showing up at the office and I didn't make the photocopies right today. It's much bigger than that. And I think that we take it very deeply, when things don't go the way we want them to. And, I learned that a lot after working in Newtown, or even with working with 9/11 survivors. It's that feeling of, I've trained for these events my whole life. I've trained for an MCI. I've trained for what to do. And then that day comes and there's absolutely a lot of things that happen that aren't by the book. And in those situations, I've seen people really, really struggle. And sometimes I'll say to a first responder in my office, okay, so that was your big event that you've trained forever for. How many of them have you done? One. Okay. So you haven't had the opportunity to learn from mistakes that you've made or that colleagues have made. And there will be mistakes, no matter what.
And there's a big difference between training and, practicing, a protocol that you're going to follow in the event that you get called to it. And then it actually happens, right? And so now your heart is pumping, your breathing is shallow, you've got cortisol and adrenaline coursing through your body, and that's going to affect your memory of what to do in that situation, because your cortex is really not infused with blood at that point. You're in fight or flight, even though you're not going to run away or fight anyone. I guess if you're a police officer, you might be involved in something like that. But the point is, your brain isn't getting all the blood that it needs because you are ready to go, right? There could be a threat to you or somebody else, and you're it. You and your colleagues are it. And so the exact details of following that protocol may not be all that accessible to you. And so that's where, you're having a normal response to an abnormal situation. But first responders are so hard on themselves. There's such guilt for, feeling like I didn't react in time, or, I could have gone up this stairwell instead of that stairwell, and then maybe she wouldn't have jumped off the parking garage. I would have been able to, grab her. There's always the what ifs, could have, would have, should have. But in the heat of the moment, you may not have access to all of those options because that's how the body responds when you're in an emergency situation.
And I remind the people sitting in my office that I'm giving therapy to all the time. I said, in that moment, you did the best you could with the information you had in that moment. Mm-hmm. It's very easy afterward to do the Monday morning quarterbacking, or even the Monday morning quarterbacking that goes on in departments when you come back from calls, or people asking, well, why didn't this happen and why didn't that happen? The bottom line is people do their best in that moment with what they have. And it's way too easy after the fact to judge oneself or others. And so if I would say anything, it's find some compassion. Find compassion for yourself in that moment, and find compassion for your coworkers in that moment. Mm-hmm. because you've trained and trained and trained feverishly for these moments. And I do believe people are doing their best. They really are. And they have to own that for a change rather than beating themselves with it.
Yes. I can't tell you how impactful that is, Bonnie, because having worked in a firehouse where people are second-guessing calls, Monday morning quarterbacking calls, and if you're the person that was, in charge of that call, or the lead medic, or first in the building, we all are there to do our best work, but we don't have all the information. We're not in total control of all the events that are happening there. And so not only do we put that pressure on ourselves, but then we have the peer pressure of other people judging, talking about it. I could have done it better, done it different. And I know as an officer that put more pressure on me than I already had, because I had to live up to my expectations, my coworkers' expectations, chief's expectations, and became a lot of pressure.
And I think, to take it a step further, compassion, to realize that there is a wear and tear effect of this job. And I've heard first responders say, I can't believe I'm sitting in your office, I can't believe I'm that guy that, needs therapy, that guy that can't sleep, drinking a little too much. I can't stop these intrusive thoughts or the flashbacks from happening. I cannot calm down. I'm on edge. I finish my wife's sentences, whatever the case may be. My fuse is extremely short, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I can't believe that I'm sitting here right now. I'm that guy who needs the help. So there's a feeling of being weak or failing, disappointment with oneself. So Bonnie and I, the reason we want to do this podcast in particular, this topic, is just to say, you got to cut yourself some slack. I mean, look at the calls that you respond to, and now compare that to the general public and what they deal with. Okay, it's a very different profession. There's going to be more wear and tear on you folks as first responders than the average person. You have to understand that your mind and body can only handle so much. And so it's probably in your best interest to monitor that and take care of it before, problems develop.
Our mission at Responder Wellness, Inc. is to subsidize or provide free of charge safety equipment and wellness services to first responders, including police officers, firefighters, EMS personnel, and 911 operators throughout Connecticut. Resources include scholarships to train new EMTs, a responder and veteran-only AA group in Danbury, Connecticut, as well as police vests, a fire and EMS boot program, yoga classes, gym memberships, and T-shirts. The founder of Responder Wellness, Inc. co-leads a peer support group sponsored by Fairfield County Trauma Response Team. Responder Wellness, Inc. is a nonprofit 501c3, and 100% of tax-deductible donations support first responders. Find us on the web at responderwellness.org, on Facebook at Responder Wellness, Inc., or email us responderwellness@gmail.com. Responder Wellness, Inc., putting responders first.
There's also a wear and tear that's unspoken too of your family.
Yeah.
The wear and tear that being a first responder puts on your family unit. Your spouses, they marry someone who they think is a firefighter, but really they marry the fire service, and they marry this way of life with a pager 24 hours a day that never goes off. And
that always goes off.
That always goes off. Yeah, exactly. There's such an impact on spouses and children as well that is going unnoticed and unrecognized. And one of the things that our team, the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team, has done is we've created a significant other support group. So myself and another colleague, Linda Roast, we run that group, and it's really an attempt to support those significant others. How are they feeling? How do they manage this? What is it like to have a storm like we just had last weekend, and be alone for 48 hours with your children with no power because your husband's at work helping everybody else? You know, there are lots of strong feelings that come up in the significant others and the family members as well. So I think that what I say to people sometimes is, don't just think of yourself, but think of your family. And if you're coming home irritable and because of your job, your family life is terrible, then you owe it to your family to do this work. Maybe you feel like you don't deserve it for you, but you owe it to your family and your children. They should have the best you that they can have. And that's what Stacy and I try to give people. We try to give them their life back.
That is so important. And, you know, from personal experience, coming home after working at 24 or 48 and knowing that I wasn't my best self for my family, then it just added a little more, like, you know, guilt on top of whatever I experienced at work. But I think your point is so important, incredibly important, that we are bringing our families into the emergency services experience, that they are, you know, in a sense, innocent participants or bystanders to what we're going through. To a certain extent, it impacts them, and they are going through it as well in their own way. So it is a gift. It is something really important that we can do by helping ourselves to help our families. And
I think it's not all negative, David, too. I mean, there's a lot of pride, right, that families feel or that children feel with a parent in that profession. So there's a lot of good, but I think we owe it to our families to look at what we're doing and what we're not doing.
What kind of support is there, or what kind of movements are there in terms of the government and other agencies to support mental health and emergency services?
Well, so I can speak a bit to Connecticut. So there is a PTSI bill that went into effect that first covered police and fire for post-traumatic stress injury. And I'm happy to say that EMS was just added to that. So EMS, dispatch, and corrections were added to that. They were added later after the fact, but they nevertheless are on it now. And I think that when government and when the state recognizes there's a problem, it validates it for all of the people underneath of them in those situations. So that's something really great that's been happening. I also think that the state mandated peer support teams for police and fire departments. Hopefully EMS will come up at some point with that as well. But the peer support teams are immeasurable in departments. They allow people to go to peers when they're struggling to get support, who then can link them to outside therapists, whether it be EAP or whether it be private practicing therapists like Stacy and I, or the TRT. I think that when it's recognized up above, it makes it easier to recognize it down below.
Right. If command staff supports, the peer support team, and, recognizes that there is trauma, exposure in this work, then it goes a lot further in that department. The other thing that was mandated was that the fire academy and the police academy have to offer a certain number of hours of education on mental health. So by educating at least police and fire about, what are the symptoms of post-traumatic stress? What should you be looking for? And then, when should you go get help? So that's really important too, because I think we do have to educate first responders about, when does it become a problem? What's normal? What's not normal? When do you need help? And then where to go to get that help. So that maybe we should talk a little bit about that. So I think first responders are much more comfortable going to another first responder, so that you have a peer support team. It is supposed to be confidential. None of it's supposed to go outside of the peer support team. It will not be that information will not be shared, especially with your command staff, because there's fear of the impact on your job or promotion. And as Bonnie said, there are therapists that are trained to work with first responders. And so it's very important for any first responder listening to this podcast. If you are going to seek therapy, make sure you find a therapist that has some experience working with first responders, because the trauma material that you bring to the therapist is a little, is different than the general public and what trauma they're bringing to the therapist. So that's really important.
I think the other piece too is that EMS is on the table now for more of that PTSI and trauma education as well, which is really good. So we're seeing a lot of movement, and it's excellent. It's happening. It's there. It's trickling down to departments. So it's all very positive. And even just having a podcast like this, it's shedding a light on a problem that's been going on for so long. And I feel we're not going to put it under the rug anymore. We're going to start addressing it. And that's what we try to do every single week. Everybody we talk to, we try to push it a little bit more.
And maybe we should emphasize that the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team, at least in this area, we will come to any department, fire department, police department, EMS, and give a presentation for free because we feel so strongly about this. What is post-traumatic stress? How do you recognize it in yourself? What are some of the ways that it can be treated? What can you do? What problems can develop if you don't get treatment? Like substance abuse can develop. Physical illness will develop over time. If your stress level stays up here and you're not really doing anything to bring it down on a regular basis, your body is going to manifest some problem eventually. So.
Right, and that's something that our trauma team really tries to educate. We go into departments, hospitals. Education is key, because if we don't get people before they go out on the road, then you're dealing with 10, 20, 30 years of accumulation. So what we're trying to do is get ahead of the game now, get into academies, get into EMT classes, and get this knowledge to people before it ever becomes a problem.
It's huge. And I just know from personal experience, also from other colleagues who have learned of your work and gotten help, that making those presentations to departments is just, incredibly important. How can people get in touch with the Fairfield County Trauma Response Team?
So we have a website. It's fctrt.org, and it lists our clinical coordinators, and then it lists all of us therapists. There are about 24 of us that are dispersed all over Fairfield County, who specialize in first responders and trauma.
Great. And if someone who's not in the Connecticut area, is there some place they can go to look up similar services?
You can go on psychologytoday.com. Which would also be a place to look up. You can search by region, you can search by insurance, by topic. So whether it's trauma, EMDR, first responders, you can really hone in on the search. But no matter who you call, the question you should ask them if you're a first responder is, have you worked with first responders? Like Stacy said before, it's very important that people have an understanding of your culture in order to work with you in the best way possible.
Well, that's great. Anything else you would like to add to this conversation?
I think in future podcasts, probably plenty.
There was a first responder who said to me, what the problem is with first responders is that they will eventually get help. It just tends to be kind of late in the game. So there's already marital difficulties, there's already maybe substance use issues, sleep, insomnia that's really entrenched. So if Bonnie and I could encourage, first responders to do one thing, is just sort of take yourself seriously. Don't wait. Get help now, or at least go and talk to a professional that is skilled in trauma and working with first responders, and let them assess you and see what they think is going on.
The unfortunate thing is when Stacy and I get calls, it's the 911 of the first responder. Right. So we view that as a 911 call from them. and we take it very seriously and we get back to them quickly, because we know if they got to the point to call us, it's bad.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And we want to get to the point where that's not how bad it is.
Kudos for all you do. It's amazing work. The word is spreading. You're doing so much to help spread that word, and I applaud you both. Really, really appreciate you both. Thank you for sharing with us today, and we will certainly have more of these conversations down the road on responder resilience. And until then, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
All right,
Goodbye.
thank you.
Thank you, David.